Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah. Good to see you all. Thank you for that great introduction, and also thanks to Credo. There are not a lot of companies out there that will dedicate a full-time employee to basically helping you with your advocacy, and that's what they've done with Josh working full-time on coal, and Credo has got a really powerful list of hundreds of thousands of people that get involved in advocacy around coal and clean energy, and we're happy to be working with you, so thanks, and thanks for pulling all of us together. We at the Sierra Club, around 2002, realized that the Cheney Energy Task Force had a pretty sinister plan to build 150 new coal-fired power plants. And the reason that they wanted to do that was because our existing fleet of coal plants is old. 70% of them are 30 years old or older, and they're designed to run for 40 or 50 years. And so we are now at a crossroads at this moment where we are either going to replace our coal fleet with more dirty energy or with clean energy. And so the Bush administration put on the drawing boards 150 new coal-fired power plants. And the Sierra Club decided that we were going to oppose every single one of them. And at the time, we had about 2 staff people to work on that. And most of these were in the heartland, they're in rural areas, they're in red states, they're in places where people might not think an environmental advocacy campaign would be successful. But we knew that every single one of these coal plants, if it was built, would be a massive new source of global warming pollution, mercury pollution, a massive new consumer potentially of mountaintop removal coal. Our existing fleet of coal plants is our biggest single source of global warming pollution. It's our biggest single source of mercury pollution. And if you think about the environmentally friendly things that we've done, for example, on all of our college campuses nationwide, 1 or 2 new coal plants wipes that out. Think of all of the corporate greening measures that, this or that company has done to get their LEED Platinum building and whatnot. 1 new coal plant erases all of those gains. And so we took on the task of fighting every single one. And you fast forward to today where we have stopped 153 coal-fired power plants from being constructed in the United States. The way that we did it was largely through grassroots power. The beauty of the Sierra Club is that we are everywhere. We have chapters in almost every state. We have activists and members in almost every city and county. And so wherever there was one of these coal plants proposed, there was somebody there who was going to have that coal plant in their backyard and wasn't interested in having it there. So in some places, we used that as the sort of core, the heart of our strategy. But then we had a couple of other things that were really essential. Litigation through our lawyers and those many other fine allies. Political pressure on governors. Some governors like Charlie Crist in Florida and Kathleen Sebelius in Kansas decided that coal was not the direction that they wanted to take their state in the future. And communications. Getting the drumbeat out there in the media, getting the drumbeat out there in our board pages and on the local news. And at the end of the day, every single one of these coal plant campaigns was a mix of those various tactics, and different things worked in different places. Again, sometimes it was political pressure, sometimes it was the litigation, sometimes it was just massive grassroots resistance. And a lot of times what tipped the scale was we created so much uncertainty around, are there going to be carbon regulations, are there going to be mercury regulations, is this really a good investment, that a lot of the time the financiers just walked away and they said, never mind, this is too risky of an investment. So the thing that I really have liked about it is it's been very open source. We've had allies, dozens and dozens and dozens of allies from all across the country. There's a lot of local ownership of every single one of these campaigns, and it's the kind of open source nature of it, and the fact that we didn't have to orchestrate this from sort of a military-style operation. This was the kind of thing that was able to use the skills and the talents of everybody who wanted to be involved all over the country. And I'll talk about this more later, but now the challenge is to take all that expertise and all that success and pivot it to retiring the existing fleet of coal plants.
Thank you. Tim, I mentioned your story briefly, but you can tell it far better than I can. Can you tell us what you did in December 2008 and why you did it?
Sure, it's a story that I've been telling a lot for the last 2.5 years. At the very end of the Bush administration, they were making a big push to put as much public land into the hands of the oil and gas industry as possible. And in Utah, this meant huge tracts of land right outside of the national parks there, Arches and Canyonlands, and some of the other places like that. They'd spent the 8 years of the Bush administration redoing the long-term resource management plans for public land in Utah. And that was a very long process that they barely got done in time to do this one last auction. So they had changed all the rules that all these lands that used to be off limits for oil and gas development were suddenly fair game. And they knew that it probably wouldn't stand with any new administration. So it was kind of like their one big opportunity to get these lands in the hands of the oil and gas industry. And there was a lot of opposition to this on various grounds, that it was pristine land, that the public had been locked out of the decision-making process. And for me, the most powerful motivation was just the threat of climate change and the way that this drill now, think later mentality threatened my own future. And so I went there with the intent to do whatever I could to stand in the way of this auction. There was a protest that was happening outside. And I walked past that protest. I ran into a couple people I knew, and I said, "Inside's where things are happening, we should go in there." And they said, "You'll just get dragged out by security." And I said, "Okay, then let's get dragged out by security and make that statement." But they wouldn't go with me. And so I walked in, and rather than drag me out, they said, "Are you here for the auction?" And I said, "Well, yes, I am." And they said, "Would you like to be a bidder?" And I said, "Well, yes, I would." And still thinking, like, okay, I'll get signed up as a bidder so I can go in there and make a speech or throw a shoe at somebody or something like that. And then after getting signed up, I walked in and saw that I actually had a much bigger opportunity to really stand in the way of this auction and create enough chaos that things could be shut down until the new administration came in. John Podesta, the head of the transition team for Obama, had already talked about this specific auction in the New York Times. And it indicated that the administration was opposed to it, that they saw it was illegitimate, but didn't know if there was anything they could do to stop it. And so I, with the bid card that I'd been given, number 70, I started driving up the prices first. And so I'd wait for it to get down to one bidder, and then I'd jump in and start driving it up and watching the other person, and then getting out before I felt like they were at their maximum price. And that was certainly effective. I mean, I was increasing the price by an order of magnitude. I remember some that I got in at $17 an acre, and I got out at $240 an acre. And the guy was still going strong, and that's for 1,000 or 2,000 acres at a time. But I was also seeing that I could be doing more, and these were still parcels that were going into the hands of the oil industry. So finally I went all in and started winning every parcel until they finally stopped the auction. And a federal agent came over and showed me a badge and said, "Can we go talk outside?" And so then he asked me basically what I was doing, and I said, "I'm trying to stand in the way of this auction as an act of civil disobedience because it's a threat to my future and a fraud against the American people." So then he took me into custody and questioned me for a few more hours, and I totally explained to him how I got to this point, the other kinds of activism that I'd done, why I realized that this kind of action was necessary, why the legal means available to us weren't reasonable. And after 3 hours then, he let me go and said that I'd be indicted later on at some point. And then the media was waiting for me, and I told them that story. And then it became kind of a big issue. Big Gap lasted around and created a good amount of public pressure. And then once the new administration came in, there was still enough buzz about it that they were under some pressure. And one of the first things the new Interior Secretary, Ken Salazar, did was overturn that auction and revoke not just the parcels that I won, but most of the other parcels as well. But then the next thing they did was 2 months later they indicted me on 2 felony charges, which kicked off a long legal process that I'm still somewhat in the middle of. I was convicted of both of those felonies in March. I was supposed to go to sentencing next week, this coming Thursday, but we just found out a couple days ago that that's been postponed, mainly because the judge found out what an organization called Peaceful Uprising was planning to do outside of the trial, which was create a little disturbance and cause a scene, as they did at the trial in March. And Peaceful Uprising was a group that I helped start shortly after the auction, and has been building throughout the last couple of years. It's a climate justice organization that is kind of trying to fill whatever role we need to in the climate movement. It started at a time in 2009 when it was clear that the climate movement wasn't working, that there was something missing. And so we've tried to fill that role to some extent and shift the center. So there's been a lot of growing support for that. They're continuing that work, and part of that recently has been mobilizing people outside of my trial and outside of the sentencing to try to bring more attention to what the government's doing here.
Thanks.